On our recent Diablo 2 stream for 2.4, we took a Phoenix Strike Assassin for a run, though with gear that is definitely a bit off from the traditional. And needless to say, it worked out quite well. So today we're going to take a look at that build, why it works, and why you probably still don't want to use a claw on it. So as you can tell by the name and the footage, we're focusing on Phoenix Strike, a rather special charge-up skill that is the only multi-elemental charge skill, and thankfully one of the charge skills that does not require a claw. The reason we're focusing on this is because 2.4 brings a rather major overhaul to the martial arts tree with two distinct changes. Number 1, charge skills now only expend 1 orb per hit, which means you can expend the separate elements of the Phoenix Strike in quick succession through the use of multi-hit skills like Dragon Talon or Dragon Claw, meaning we can launch the Chaos Bolts, Lightning Bolts, and the Meteor from Phoenix Strike super quickly. And number 2, while charged up, your martial arts skills like Dragon Talon, Claw, Tail, and Flight are all treated similarly to Smite, where they are auto-hit, and therefore you're pretty much guaranteed to trigger your charges unless the enemy moves out of range during the animation. There is, however, one drawback that could be worried about if you know the mechanics of the skills, and that is Phoenix Strike's Lightning and Cold have a mechanic called Next Hit Delay, which basically prevents you from stacking a lot of certain damage sources on a single target over a super short time frame. Though in practice, this is not a major issue for this build, since the Cold bolts are destroyed on impact, and the Lightning pierces targets, and they both perform a loop animation, which means there's plenty of opportunities for them to loop back around into each other and still deal their damage on the return flight if they were denied on the initial flight by overlapping damage. You could also slow your attack speed to guarantee the initial damage, but I found this detrimental to the charge up times. That said, this build is actually probably one of the simplest martial arts builds to play with, even if you don't fully understand those niche mechanics, since we generally just use 3 skills in most circumstances. Burst of Speed to get our attack speed up to the maximum for charging up and kicking, Dragon Talon as our main release mechanism, since with plus skills, it's 3 hits and will trigger all 3 orbs on striking, and of course the titular Phoenix Strike, which is our main area of effect damage source. You also probably want 1 point into the Dragon Flight skill as well for mobility's sake, and to keep you from needing to rely on Enigma, since you'd rather get resist from your armor than teleport, since you'll be in kind of the thick of things. In terms of synergies, it really depends on what kind of flavor you want to go for, but with our setup, the order I would do the synergies in would be Claws of Thunder first for the biggest burst damage, and it works well with our weapon, of course, and our weapon is cheap. Next will be Fist of Fire for the meteor damage, which helps stabilize our damage and works well with our shield, and then last, if you decide to go full synergy, would be Blades of Ice, just to make the cold aspect more damaging, which our helmet helps with a bit, but it's not as much as the other two. And because of that, this last one is optional if you instead want to get a Shadow for support. With high-end gear, I don't feel the absolute need for it though, but with more budget setups, it would be nice. And for support skills, while I did burn a point in Death Sentry, it never felt necessary to cast outside of using as a pointer on the stream, so I'd probably skip that and instead get your more utility support skills like Cloak of Shadow, Mind Blast, or even 1 point in Shadow Master, unless you're doing like high player count things and you need the Corpse Explosion to kind of clear out the tougher enemies. I would also recommend getting 1 safety point into Fade, just in case you need to dash through a bunch of gloams or run into a particularly nasty unique mob. In terms of stats, we went super simple, with strength and dexterity enough for gear and the rest into vitality, because we're testing this without a CTA on swap because we have another test build on that one. If you want to do a call to arms, I would recommend possibly going for max block and using battle orders to get your life up to a reasonable level for more durability, though it's not entirely necessary as you've seen. As far as the mercenary goes, we just went with an Infinity Holy Freeze mercenary, which, believe it or not, is not for the resist piercing, even though it does help, but rather for the defense piercing, which means the budget version of this build would actually want an Act 5 mercenary with Battle Cry and something like Lawbringer, rather than sticking to the tried and true Act 2. In terms of our gear, that's where things get a bit weird, but also pretty flexible depending on what you want to go for, which in my case is taking advantage that we're basically playing a Kicksin with a crazy amount of elemental damage potential through charges. So for a budget build, I would literally start with the budget Kicksin base and then lean into each of these changes as they become available. Starting with the sword, Crescent Moon, which in and of itself is a fairly budget item, this sword packs 2 stats we absolutely want and several stats that are just nice to haves. The big wants plus are ignore target defense for our charge up and minus 35% enemy lightning resist for whenever we release our second kick. The nice to haves are the static field, proc, open wounds, and mana per kill, which are just, like we said, nice to have. The other big pick for this build is actually Phoenix Shield, which unfortunately is probably the most expensive part of the build. But what it brings to the table is pretty much insane for this, with minus enemy fire resist to boost your meteor damage, redemption aura for keeping you topped off, enhanced damage for your actual kicks that do physical damage, and a fairly solid mix of other just useful or nice stats. Now, Medusa's Gaze would be a fun alternative, though you could go with everything from Spirit to a P-Diamond Mosers and be fine. The last of the elemental modifier equipment is actually somewhat optional, and that is Nightwing's Veil. Reality is, you'll be fine with any plus skill helmet. Even Harlequin Crest would work okay and be kind of easier to find. Since this helmet doesn't naturally have any minus resist, so you're going to be getting a small bump to the cold damage on the top of the skills. The only reason it actually has that negative resist here is because we have a cold rainbow facet in it. You can get the same or even more mileage from some good rare or magical circlets as well with rainbow facets in them, and if you're skipping the cold synergy, even going Guillaume's is going to be able to be fairly decent for even just a pure kick assassin from time to time for boss killing and stuff like that, though I like using Phoenix Strike on them too because Infinity lets me hit them. In terms of the rest of our gear, it's pretty predictable, with Chains of Honor for plus skills and resist, though everything from Viper Magi to, yes, even Enigma can work here, or even Treachery if you're not regularly using Burst of Speed and don't mind that Fade overriding it. The Amulet is a Mara's for plus 2 skills and resist, and again, any plus skill amulet will work here. This is just a quick, reliable swap in, and if you're going max block, a plus 2 skills safety craft would actually be pretty useful here for the block percent it provides to save a bit on dexterity. Ring-wise, I have Raven Frost for dexterity and cannot be frozen, and a dual leech ring to keep us topped off, though with redemption going, that becomes a bit less necessary. It's just nice to have. And I would like to say that you could look at like Bull Kathos or even a good resist ring as an alternative to this. It's not really necessary, it's just, like I said, nice to have. And on the belt, we went with String of Ears for damage reduction, though everything from T-Gods for lightning resist and stuff like that to a faster hit recovery resist belt is fine. On the boot slot, we've gone with the Kicker's Friend, our upped Gore Riders. All of the damage of Myrmidon Greaves with all of the support power of Gore Riders, with Crushing Blow and more open wounds. Frankly, there is not a single boot I'd prefer over this for a kicker, and in the gloves, we have a somewhat superfluous Dracul's Grasp, which I use more to keep my mercenary alive by giving him life tap than for myself. Though you could get some blood-crafted martial arts gloves if you're looking for the absolute optimal setup, since that would help your damage quite a bit. In terms of charms, just a bunch of skillers, resists, and the usual Torch and Annie. Overall, this build was a lot more fun to play than I thought it would be, and the changes to martial arts make me really want to build both a budget and a starter build video for it. It's probably one of the shining gems of the 2.4 changes for me, right up there with the changes to Hydra.